All right, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, at least we got the GoPro too.
We got the GoPro.
Okay.
All right, folks. Thank you all for coming. Holy cow. Philip and I were taking wagers on whether or not anyone would show up. Thank you, Bobby. I think I did.
Yeah.
Philip was taking the pessimist wager, and I was staying hopeful. Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, thank you again, everyone, for coming out to spend your valuable Saturday afternoon to talk everyone's favorite subject, which is politics, especially these days. I'm Devin Foray. I'm running for Congress as an independent. Some of you saw me a couple weeks ago up in Orville at a candidate forum. I met some of you. I met Valerie at a meet and greet a couple days before that. So some familiar faces and some not so familiar faces. So I want to talk a little bit about who I am, my background, and then a couple of my campaign ideas, why I was motivated to run, that kind of thing, the typical. And then we'll try to open it up and just do some open Q&A and keep it, pretty loose. So background on me: when I was 5 years old, I was born in Louisiana. When I was 5 years old, my family moved up to Ferry County. My dad got a job up near Curlew, Washington, and I spent the rest of my childhood living in the country, and it was great. I loved it. But it was a isolated experience in a lot of ways, even though I didn't realize that necessarily. I was just enjoying being a kid. I was in the Boy Scouts. I was a free sport athlete. I ran cross country and basketball and track. And when I graduated from high school, I was accepted in the University of Washington. And so I moved to the big city. And that was a big change. And going to a place like Seattle, you're experiencing a culture, something I've been exposed to. And a lot of the, they weren't even necessarily explicit political beliefs or anything. My parents themselves were not particularly political folks. My dad was actually a Republican from Louisiana. It should be big ones. Thanks for checking. My mom's a Democrat from New England, but they weren't politically, or they didn't talk politics in the household. So by the time I graduated high school, I didn't have much of a sense of a political identity. I just, I was excited to go start the next chapter in the big city. But of course, being in a place like Seattle, I need a lot more liberals in a place like Seattle than I do in Ferry County. And I had to kind of learn how to, make my peace with that and get along with people who, it's not that I'm that hard to get along with, but I'm being exposed to ideas that I hadn't been exposed to as much in a place like Ferry County. But it's a two-way street, because I would meet a lot of people in a place like Seattle who grew up, who spent their whole life in Seattle, and they really don't have a whole lot of understanding of what it's like to be in a really rural community east of the mountains. And so I spent about 9 years in Seattle before I moved back here to Eastern Washington, and I loved it. I loved my time in Seattle. I loved my time growing up in Ferry County, and I think that I'm establishing all of this because for me it's a lot of the basis of why, as many of you know, I've chosen to run as an independent for this race. I have strong political beliefs. I'm happy to talk about them on any topic you want me to, tell you what I think on a given policy, on a given issue. I'll have that discussion and I'll back it up. But I think there's a deeper kind of rot and issue in our politics these days, and I don't think I'm going to have to work too hard to convince many of you, but it is this, we have come to a time in our country's history where we just can't talk. It is toxic, it is divided, and that is all by design too. You know, we can quibble about which party has better policies. So Democrats, if we do this, this will work better. The Republicans, this will work better. But that's not the way our politics are playing out, certainly not in this day and age. And for most of my adult life, I'm 31, so I was 20 during the 2015 primary cycle, during the rise of our now president. And I would say the last 10 years has been characterized by an extreme amount of polarization and an intentional effort to drive the American working class further and further apart such that they are increasingly at each other's throats. And that's not a path to success. I just don't think we are, we've got to get our bearings, and we don't have them right now. And so it's important to me to run as an independent. It's not easy to run as an independent. People are skeptical, rightly so, and there's not a kind of party infrastructure on either side that you can plug right into, so you have to try to get by on the merits of your ideas. And so let's talk about a few of those ideas. I think the fundamental thing that really drove me to kind of feel like I couldn't step away from this possibility, and I tried to push it away. No, don't do this. Don't blow up your life, Devin. Why would you do this? Was a real sense, motivated by a lot of what I've been saying, that the real problem in DC, there are many, but one of the primary ones is the influence of money in our political process. And that is a fact that affects both major political entities in Washington, D.C. And it makes a lot of the kind of political rhetoric and political programming and news media bites, etc. A lot of it is ultimately political theater, in my view. I mean, I think that there are strongly held views on both sides, there's no doubt about that. But far too often you see party leaders in both parties answering first and foremost to their big donors, not their voters. And that is a problem that has been increasingly getting out of control over the last 50 years. We can go through the whole political history here. I won't bore you, but it really starts in the 70s and 80s, and it's this slow creep all the way that culminates in Citizens United in 2010. Fun fact, in 2000, well, not so fun, but after the Citizens United decision, I saw this fact recently, the amount of billionaire money that has flowed into federal elections increased by 6,000%. And it's up to now, just that one category of donations makes up nearly 20% of all money flowing into our elections. And that doesn't count other special interests, other lobbying groups, other corporate interests, super PACs, all of that, which also get a lot of their money from the same kinds of individuals. So, we can keep going round and round and round and trading the White House and trading the House of Representatives and the Senate. But until we do something fundamentally to get a handle on the influence of money in Washington, D.C., I truly really fear that nothing fundamental will change. We'll get some change here and there. We'll nibble around the edges. We'll attack this or that. But there's this deeper problem that we need to address. We've got a third-degree burn, and we're all trying to convince each other that I've got the Band-Aid with the Neosporin that's going to take care of it. No, you don't. We need more critical attention and more focus on this issue. So, as I was, thinking about how do you fundamentally work on this problem? I mean, there are constitutional scholars who have talked a lot about this. The general consensus here is that you need a constitutional amendment that can meaningfully limit how much money can flow into our politics. But getting a constitutional amendment passed is very difficult. It's a very high bar. And so we've got to first focus on how do we create an environment where such a constitutional amendment, getting to that place, becomes more realistic. And so the kinds of policies that I would be in DC really focused on fighting for, things like term limits for members of Congress, banning stock ownership for all federally elected officials, and even a lot of senior administration officials. and public campaign financing, campaign finance reform more broadly. So we can get into the specifics maybe of some of how some of these policies would work and how I think they help to reinforce each other. But ultimately, I think these kinds of policies create an environment where more civic-minded and more honest politicians can start to find their way to DC. And after some time, again, it's not going to happen instantly. I think a lot of politicians love to campaign and they make promises about how quickly things can be changed. If only you'll vote for them, I can't promise that these kinds of changes will happen overnight. They won't happen overnight, but we didn't get into this situation that we're in overnight. It's taken quite a long time for us to dig ourselves down into this pit. We're not going to just instantly jump right back out of it. So we've got to take seriously the kind of work that it's going to require to create this environment where we're improving our odds of this success. And I think if we can get these kinds of reforms in place, which are overwhelmingly popular across the American public, it doesn't matter if you're asking Republicans or Democrats or black, white, male, female, gay, straight, you can slice up the American electorate any way you can imagine. And things like term limits and campaign finance reform and banning stock ownership for members of Congress, I mean, these things poll overwhelmingly favorably across the political spectrum, and yet we don't see much talk of these kinds of policies from either major political party, and there's a reason for that. I mean, they fundamentally understand this is how the gravy train is stopped. You know, when we succeed in getting stuff like this over the finish line, it's going to be the end of the line for a lot of politicians who have happily gone along with a highly corrupt status quo in DC. And I think that if we can accomplish those things, and I think that we can, I think there's a path to doing so, then we set the stage for a constitutional amendment, in the next 10 to 20 years. Again, something about me, I guess a general quality that I try to possess is I try to be realistic. I tell people I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist, and sometimes those two things really have to work to balance each other out. So when I say I think in the next 10 to 20 years we can get a constitutional amendment to limit money in our political, life, I know a lot of people would, the idea of waiting 20 more years for a real durable fix here, it's not exactly the most attractive thing, but we also have to, like I said, we've got to be realistic about the path forward, and it's taken us 40 or 50 years to get where we are. Like I said, we're not going to undo it all right away. So that's it at the kind of high-level structural federal level that really motivated me, really, spoke to me on this deep level, that until we address some of those things, much of the other arguments and discussions that we have, they're just going to be that. They're going to be arguments and discussions that serve really no purpose except to pit the American people against one another while a lot of corruption continues to persist in our capital, and our leaders are not working in our interest in that context. However, we also have this district, right? We have Congressional District 4, and it has its needs, and it has things that, are unique to it, and it's hurting. This district, District 4, has the lowest household income on average of any congressional district in Washington State. So we've had a Republican in this seat for 32 years, and that's still the case. We've had, farms continue to close. I think over the last two USDA census reports that they do, farm census reports, as many as 1,400 farms have closed across this district. And yet we see increasing agricultural acreage, which means what? It means increasing consolidation, bigger operators, larger operators, and an increase in out-of-district money, often institutional money, private equity money, hedge fund money, Wall Street money that's coming in and buying up farmland. The end result of that is money that gets extracted out of our district, out of our communities, into the pockets of people who have so much money they don't even know what to do with it already. And this is how rural communities in rural America dies. This is the formula that pushes rural communities, out and only allows the biggest players to continue to operate. That's the reality. That's the reality of what's happening all across this district. And we're not going to address that problem, in my view, again, by kind of resorting to the typical partisan bickering that we're all very accustomed to. We've just got to take it very seriously. This is a real problem in our district. how are we going to work to solve it? So there's a program, it's called the REAP program. It's administered by the USDA. It actually faced some pretty significant cuts last year, but I would propose a pretty massive expansion of that program that would make a lot of money available specifically to agricultural operators to invest in installing things like solar capacity on their land. The reason why I really think this is a kind of path that we should be considering, we've seen over the last, I think since 2017, something like 40 or $50 billion in direct farm subsidies have come into the agricultural industry from the federal government. But the problem with that approach is, and farmers will say this, that money, once it gets made available to them, it's often right back out of their pocket, and it's paying either their creditors, it's paying the bank, or it's going on to pay the input supplier companies that they've got to buy their fuel from, their supplies from, and there has also been massive corporate consolidation in those industries. And so there's very little choice that farmers all across the country, not just here in District 4, they've got to pay what they're asked to pay to get the supplies they need. There's no real competition in those markets. And then when they go to sell their goods, there's also massive consolidation in the output side. So whether they're selling to kind of retail wholesalers or whether they're selling to global supply distribution companies, it's also 3 or 4 kind of monopolies, giant corporate global monopolies that control that as well. So farmers are price takers, right? They don't really have a choice in how much profit they can generate. And so if that's the case, well, yes, if you cut a check, that might tide them over for one more season. But if we invested that money instead in trying to build productive resources that create predictable revenue for them over a long period of time, in this case energy, right? I think I've run the mental math or the back of the envelope math here a few times through the campaign, but imagine, a farmer who's got, 50 or 100 acres of land. If they can install something like 5 acres of solar, so a small fraction on their land, and they can strike a power purchase agreement with their public utility district, which we have in abundance all over Eastern Washington, then those farmers can see predictable revenues of, depending on what the PPA rates were, they can see, $25,000 to $75,000 in annual revenue every single year for the next 10 years. And that will help to buffer the bad years, when they're down on the crops, and it will give them even more kind of to stock up in the good years. So I guess what I'm saying here is I'm trying to speak to a little bit of how I tend to think about these kinds of problems. I think that, yes, we can just throw money at these issues. We've been doing that. But that doesn't create a sustainable, durable, long-term solution for the problem at hand. And it also just continues to enable the kind of massive corporate consolidation we're seeing, which is driving independent operators and smaller size family operators just out of this industry entirely. There's some other things district specific I guess we could get into, but how's everyone feeling? I see some nodding, I don't think I see anyone sleeping. That's good. Not yet. I told you Philip's the pessimist. Not yet, he says. I feel like I've said a lot. I kind of want to start to open this up a little bit so it's not just me yammering on and on and on. And I think good stuff comes from having a dialogue, not just one person standing on stage and kind of, we've got to volunteer.
You said it would take 10 to 20 years to get to a place in our environment politically where we can have a constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
What, in your eyes, does that process look like?
Yeah. Yes, the process to get to that environment is, so right now to get a constitutional amendment, either, I'm going to get the numbers here wrong, I think, but the states can get together and propose the amendment. That's never happened in the history of the country. The way that every amendment has been proposed thus far is Congress, I believe it's a 3/4 vote in both the House and the Senate. They have to approve the language of the amendment. And then the amendment goes to the states to be ratified, and as 2/3 of the states have to ratify, and it becomes constitutional law. Right now, we are nowhere near getting consensus on this issue of 75% in the Senate and the House, because there are just too many people in both the Senate and the House who rely on the status quo, right? They rely on the money that this machine that has funded their careers. They don't want to just see it go away. They wouldn't even know how to operate. And so this gets back to a couple of the ideas I mentioned, right? Term limits, public campaign finance system, banning stock trading. I think that these kinds of policies start to create an incentive structure that make it harder for more corruptible and self-serving politicians to find their way to DC. I mean, term limits puts a hard cap on how long you can be there, right? Banning stock trading means you can't be enriching yourself while you're in DC. If you're the kind of person who wants to go to DC because you want power and you want 20 or 30 years of exerting your power over your neighbors and you want to get rich while you do it, well, if you're now looking at the status quo in DC and the status quo is, well, boy, I can't actually inside trade, and I'm going to be gone within 10 or 12 years anyway. So, what is there for me here, right? You're going to have a lot of people who are just self-selecting out, right? People who otherwise maybe would have gone into this system because it's very attractive to them. But that's exactly the kind of person I think we want to find ways to disincentivize their participation in our federal government. And so, and the other point is public campaign finance. I don't know if people are that familiar with public campaign finance as an idea. We hear a lot about campaign finance reform, and I think there are things to be done there too, transparency and reporting. But a public campaign finance system is one where public money, some amount of public money, is made available to candidates who are running for office. And they get access to that money if they meet certain benchmarks, right? So one thing might be there's a one-to-one donation match. So let's say you donate $20 to my campaign. There's this pool of money, it's taxpayer money, it's public money, and $20 also comes in from that. And right, it can be configured all sorts of ways, right? You can have the ratio different, you can have small kind of grants that if you hit a certain amount of targets, or if you get 20,000 grassroots donors, right, you unlock a $50,000 grant or something that gets in your campaign. The point is, all the details are to be hashed out, but the idea is you want a system in place that allows honest candidates to not have to go grovel for money from big donors, right? So if you put all these things together, it's like, okay, we've got public campaign finance, we've got a path for honest candidates to actually have the resources required to run a race, right? Win or lose, but it gives them a fighting chance. And then we've got a kind of condition set up in DC that is just less attractive to the kind of people who are going to take advantage of their power once they're in DC. So those kinds of reforms, I think, are more capable of accomplishing. Once they're in place, I think back to your kind of original point in question, I think we start to see a makeup shift within Congress where we're just going to see a bigger majority of senators and representatives who are going to get on board with getting a constitution. They're going to start to say, okay, we got to get serious about getting this over the finish line. We've been kind of waiting for the numbers of those more honest representatives to grow over a number of campaign cycles. That's why I say kind of 10 to 20 years. It's not all going to happen overnight. You work hard to get these reforms in place, and then once they are, you kind of have to wait for them to filter out the bad apples and filter in the good apples. And then the citizens, make sure we're putting our pressure on our representatives and say, hey, we really want this. This is important to us, right? You've got to get this done. So does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. Long answer, sorry. I'll try to keep it a little brief. I can go on and on. I got it from my mom. Anyone else?
This is kind of a crazy idea, but what about requiring some kind of certification for being able to run a budget or, do a problem-solving process?
Yeah, that's going to be, I think, a harder. That's a harder ask. But there have been proposals from more conservative and libertarian members of Congress. Typically, this is like an ideological that we want a balanced budget. I'm actually not even that opposed to the idea of a balanced budget.
Just the best practices.
No, right. Yeah. I'll give it some more thought, Bobby.
It's just a wild idea. It's just a wild
Sure.
idea.
Anyone else?
All right, I have a question.
Oh, I think your brother had a question,
I
Philip.
guess. Oh.
Okay, so just for me, quick question. So a lot of people in my generation have extreme anxiety when it comes to AI and staying in the workforce. Like, so I got like 40 years to plan, and my job's probably going to go in 2 or 3 years. So what's your whole stance on how we're going to deal with massive unemployment when that comes around, because it's going to come?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I haven't had a lot of time to talk about AI actually on the campaign so far. It hasn't really come up, shockingly, so thanks for bringing it up because it is worth talking about. Prior to this run, I was actually, for the last 5 years or so, I've worked as a software engineer, so I'm pretty familiar and knowledgeable about what's going on in the world of AI. I'm not deeply embedded in it, but I've got a pretty good technical sense of it. This is something that could turn into a big conversation, but I think that if one proposal that I've seen from Representative Ro that I appreciate his perspective on is, if AI in some given industry reaches a point where it's so efficient, it's so effective, every worker's been fired, there's like 3 people who own 20% of the world's supply of a given industry, that at that point there has to be serious consideration given to nationalizing that particular good or resource. Which I think, if you understand the technical aspect of how LLMs and AI get built, they're built on the corpus of all human knowledge and output. And so I guess the rationale there is, well, we've demonstrated, based upon using the fruits of everyone's labor throughout all time, basically, that we can produce XYZ good basically for free. But right now the problem is that the result of that is there's a handful of people who are living on private islands who are hoarding their control of those resources over the rest of us. And money ceases to even mean anything in this kind of context. It gets pretty science fiction pretty quickly, but I think that's why I'm talking about it, because I don't think we're well equipped to, if it goes the way that a lot of the most, I call it the AI hype crowd. A lot of these are Silicon Valley CEOs and people like that. They have the most vested interest in seeing money continue to flow into this venture, and I'm sure you're familiar. If it goes the way they're saying it goes, then our entire economic model, not to freak everyone out too much, but our entire economic model just doesn't make sense any longer. If people can't work, if there's literally no jobs and AI can just do everything on planet Earth, then we're going to have some serious philosophical and existential conversations about, like, what is our purpose on this planet, and what is it that we owe to one another, and what is the meaning of life, and I don't think that our economic model to this point has really demanded that we get deep into our philosophy textbooks in that way. I do think that, okay, that's the kind of, I don't know if it's the utopian or dystopian, maximalist scenario, let's say. I tend to believe, my personal belief is that AI is going to land somewhere between the people who claim it's going to solve every problem on planet Earth and the people who say it's going to cause like Terminator level oblivion and we're all going to die. I think it's a useful technology in certain ways, for certain use cases. I think the number of use cases that get talked about is probably blown out of proportion. I would support efforts to meaningfully slow down some AI development progress, to slow down data center build out acceleration. The technology is already quite powerful. What we have right now today, if we just kind of paused and said, okay, we're going to let entrepreneurs and innovators kind of work with this current state of technology, I think we'd start to see meaningful, breakthroughs. People would make new companies, people would optimize certain processes, but I don't think we necessarily land in nobody has a job any longer. And I mean, the CEOs in Silicon Valley are saying that. I mean, they're the ones saying that, so it's not like you're asking something crazy here. Anyway, I'm yammering on again, but does that more or less address this good question? Any follow-ups are welcome.
Yeah, I guess the thoughts that I've always had, and it's gonna sound very Andrew Young, is should we have, like, since we're a capitalistic society that values private ownership, should we be entitled to that data that we're throwing out there? And maybe, is it possible to consider taxing these corporations, like, hey, you're getting rid of the $60,000 a year job, maybe you should be paying $30,000 a year to replace that with AI?
Yeah. And I think things like trademark and copyright should be enforced against these companies. I think Sam Altman said, if you do that, you're going to slow down, you're basically going to totally stall out all our progress. And, I don't think that's necessarily the worst outcome at this stage. Like, you built a technology that fundamentally relies on, let's be honest, just stealing the output of like tens of millions of other humans, and you get to monopolize the return. I mean, I think that this is where we get back to, someone like Yang, UBI, collectivizing some of that work. But again, this is such a charged topic because in America, no one wants to talk about collectivizing anything. No one wants to talk about shared common ownership. It can be, am I getting a call? Sorry, folks. We're live here. Okay, we're good. Oh. Spam risk. Hey, that's my best friend. Yo, Spam, what's up? I think the most important thing to do right now is continue just having conversations about it. It's kind of wishy-washy as that sounds like. I really think like we don't have the kind of cultural or economic foundation as a nation to, like, to your point, like really understand the implications of if all these jobs go away. I don't think that they will necessarily. I don't buy Sam Altman's claims, but they could. And then we're going to have serious conversations about how to redistribute resources in our society, which is not a conversation we wanted to have in America pretty much ever.
This is kind of...
Oh,
Oh.
Masha, I'll come to you next, Lawrence.
Yeah, I was kind of curious. We've had an interesting relationship with Canada over the last few years, and also just with trade agreements. I'm kind of curious where you stand, especially as a border community, sort of affected by this.
Are you speaking specifically to tariffs or our general, I guess tariffs and our general bullying of our neighbor? Yeah, well, I think the bullying of Canada is pretty unwise, to say the least. It's going to take some work to repair that relationship, and I don't think the current administration cares to do that work, and I don't think even if they did care to do the work, I'm not sure they have the delicate touch that would be required. I grew up 10 minutes south of Canada. I learned to drive in Canada. There were no traffic lights in all of Ferry County, so for driver's ed, we had to go across the border. We had to drive around in Grand Forks because that was the first, it was the closest place we could find a stoplight. So I have a lot of fond memories of Canada. It was the closest movie theater. My brothers and I would go up to the aquatic center in Grand Forks. So I find it, deeply confusing why we are suddenly so antagonistic towards Canada, and obviously it's had impacts, and unfortunately it comes kind of at the COVID messed things up with closing the borders, and then kind of, I think as soon as it was like, well, maybe we're in a place to start to reestablish where things were, we get a really hostile administration that seems to want to do everything in its power to piss Canada off. So I don't think our northern neighbors really have done anything to warrant that. And yeah, I don't know if I have anything specific for you other than that's certainly not my focus is is not to continue that antagonism. Lawrence?
So I'm gonna piggyback off the AI question, but like my worry, I guess, is there seems to be a negative cognitive and psychological impact with AI that like people seem to be critical thinking less, and this is not just AI, it's also using the internet so much that people are like, oh, let's look this up and have this thing decide for me, because it's like, oh, and outsourcing thought.
Yeah,
because thought is so important, and there's that element, and I'm gonna add some more, and then also coupled with there is a lot of image generation, of course, from AI, and people are producing art with AI, but I don't necessarily consider that art. I think that there needs to be some limit on it, especially because it is plagiarizing actual artists who are not even benefiting from it. So I mean, I think that would be a copyright thing, which you kind of mentioned, and then but I mean, generally speaking, it's like how can we keep up with technology that's being rolled out too fast at a rate that we can keep up with?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right, it's not just AI. I mean, it is a broader concern around social media use in general. Even pre-AI, the algorithms on social media platforms had gotten pretty sophisticated. And I can speak to this again pretty, I'm pretty familiar as a software engineer with the way, I think that a lot of people don't fully appreciate how much of your data when you're online, on your phone, on your computer, how much can be tracked and stored and analyzed in a million different ways, and then fed into recommendation algorithms and all sorts, advertised, targeted ads, and it's exactly, your concern is right though, Lawrence, it creates, the end result of that is a lot of outsourced thought to our devices, to our screens, to our phones, and no one's immune to that. The human brain is not immune to that. In the early days of some of these sites like Facebook and YouTube, I mean, these companies hired psychologists to come in and kind of help them refine their algorithms to be as basically addictive as possible. And I say quick, you can try to hold me to that. A couple of years ago, I actually made the choice, I think this was back in the fall of 2022. I made the choice to get off the social media platforms I was on. And I didn't consider myself much of a social media user even. I mean, I kind of perused a couple sites. Most days I checked, Reddit or Twitter, YouTube, and that was about it. And I made this choice. You know what, I'm gonna go off social media, entirely off it. And it was so hard. I would not have told you that I had a problem with social media. I would have said, oh, I use it. Well, I think I probably use it less than most people do. It was truly breaking an addiction. I was having withdrawal symptoms for weeks. And I started with just one platform. After a couple weeks, the withdrawals finally broke. And then I felt like I was getting my brain back a little. And I was like, this is positive enough that I should add another platform. Let's get another one out of the mix. And I did that for a few weeks. And then I said, all right, that's the final one. I'm on the chopping block. Let's get them all out. And I had this rule for myself. I said, okay, on the first of every month, because I had no expiration for this. I said, on the first of every month, you can check your social media accounts. Log in, check it out, but that's it. The rest of the month, you're off. And for the first 6 months or so, I was, there was a part of me that halfway through the month, I might hear some news or something happen, and there was a part of my brain that would think, oh, I'll check this on the first. Oh, I got to remember when I can log on next time, I want to go see what some creator or some YouTube channel had to say about X, Y, Z. After about 9 months, that I stopped entirely thinking about social media. It was gone completely from my brain, and it was a really profound experience. It really felt like I had reclaimed my own mind in a way that I didn't realize I'd even lost it. And so, yeah, Lawrence, you're entirely right. I honestly can't do justice to how kind of powerful that experience was. And social media has managed to get its claws back into me a little bit these days, and I have to be on it for the campaign, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I think I am very in favor of, we're seeing increasingly schools make decisions to ban smartphones from classrooms, and I think just school entirely, you come in on day one, you have to forfeit your phone. I've seen people who are skeptical of that. I think Jonathan Haidt was the author who wrote a book about this, and it was a bestseller, and it kind of became the talk of the town for a while. And I've seen people try to disparage and kind of discredit, like, oh, he's overstating the evidence. I don't really care. It's good, like, we should be doing that. I don't think, we decide the minds of children, which are still developing. Like, adult minds are not, they can't withstand, really. They have no built-in defense. There's no immune system for these platforms. Like I said, they are engineered literally to get you addicted. So I know I'm once again saying a lot here, but it is a deep concern. I think that there has got to be some increased regulation of these giant tech companies around the way they use our data, the data that they're able to track and use from us. But unfortunately, I don't think there are people in Congress who just even have the technical understanding and know-how of how this whole system is just like way above their pay grade. I do have some understanding. I'm not going to claim to be the greatest software engineer on the planet, but I do have enough of a technical understanding of this stuff that I think if Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk was sitting in front of me in a committee hearing, like, I could ask him some pretty probing questions that would get to the heart of some of these concerns. Is this cutting in and out?
Yeah, cutting in and out.
Sorry. I think I gotta keep it real close.
Do you want to try switching to the other mic?
We'll keep rolling with it. I'll try to not move it at all. Sorry, just behind you, Masha, and then we'll, yeah.
I want to commend you being a young person. You said you're 31 years old.
That's right.
For standing up and running for Congress. Yes. We need to see more young people.
Thank you.
My question, this is what I want to say. So you talked about, utopia, philosophical, and as an indigenous woman, we follow the 7th generation. Have you heard of that? We plan things 7 generations from now.
Oh,
to take care of
yeah,
things.
yes.
And pardon me?
We should do that.
All politicians should do that. Every
You're talking
politician.
about long-term thinking.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. And so, so one of your things, you talk about proactive wildlife prevention, forest management. That's 7 generations. We live in fire country. We
Yes.
are going through a drought.
Yes.
We have, in the district we live in, we have the largest, North Central Washington, the largest employers is the Cabo tribe. We also have the Cabo Reservation and the Yakimas, 2 largest reservations in Washington state. How are you, or have you been working with the tribes? And if we don't have a healthy Mother Earth, we have Minik. Minik is another word for S-A, you fill it out. Okay? And I am a grandmother, and I think about this all the time. I look around, we have so many elders, but I really commend the young people that are here because they're going to be taken over. Because I'm not going to be here in 20 years, I might be, but where are you at? How do you see this? Do you ever think about the 7th generation? If you don't know about that philosophy, check it out, look it up, whatever, because we need to take care of this, and we're in dire straits because we are in a drought, and they're dismantling the National Forest Service. Come on, we are in trouble. And if we don't have a healthy Mother Earth,
What is it all for?
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my question.
We need to have nature to be healthy. We need to be out in it, doing physical things
Yeah.
for our psychological health.
So I want to know, how are you going to work holistically with all these other groups, with the tribes? If you haven't reached out to the Cabo tribe, if you haven't reached out to Yakimas, I highly recommend you do.
Yeah. I have reached out to the Colville. I never heard back. Philip, we're working on trying to get a contact, or we'll find someone. We've been trying to get in touch. Maybe you're the person to get in touch with.
Well, I'm not Yakima, but
For Colville. I've got a connection down to Yakima that I'm following up with now, and there are specific things I'm looking forward
And
to
when
talking
you
to
do
them.
go in, my recommendation is to you is to listen.
Yes.
Listen to them. Don't go in, I want to do this. Listen first. Listen
Yeah.
to what they want.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Agreed. And to your first point about 7 generations, I wasn't familiar with that specific terminology, but yeah, we think in this country in terms of quarters, the next quarterly report, right? And that has dominated that kind of short-term thinking for massive long-term negative external cost. I'm with you. Yeah.
My concern is in that respect of what we're going to do about the people that are in power now taking control of things that we assumed they didn't have the power to do. Like, we're not going to have the Forest Service anymore. We are not going to do all of the things that have been done in the past. We're not going to ask Congress if we can go to war. We're just going to do it because we think we can and it'll be fun and we can push the button and we can kill people. And it's like I'm a fifth grader playing games. How can we get control of the presidency and his disastrous things that are happening so that this does not ever happen again?
Yeah. Yes, it's a good question and it's important to talk about now. I think this also gets back to a bit of why I'm motivated to run as an independent. If you look at the history of the last, I don't know, really the post-World War II era in this country, slowly but surely more and more power has been vested to the executive branch. Congress has passed bills and emergency authorization powers and, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just slowly but surely the executive has claimed this authority and they are not, willing really to give it back up. And this is why the whole system was designed intentionally for three branches of government that would compete with one another, right? The idea from the Founding Fathers was not that you would have parties competing to take over all the branches of government so they could all collude together to basically run the government as one big mafia. They envisioned it as the Supreme Court, the judiciary, the legislative branch, the executive branch would be independent bodies that would fight with each other, right? They would fight for kind of their respective control. And this, again, this is the utopian in me or the optimist in me, but I do think if we can get the money under control a little bit, the amount that money influences our politics, I think that will break some of the partisanship in our country too. I think things have become so partisan because you know that you've either got to join one club or the other. There's two clubs, and really it's just one club. But you join that club if you want to get into the political game. And the moment that there are kind of other avenues that open up and people can get into that club and people who are really compelled by civic service, a sense of duty to their community, I think this spell, this fever starts to break. And I think that we could potentially, I hope, get back to a place where Congress views itself not as the cheerleading squad for the president. They view themselves as the representatives of the American public who are there to debate, often have challenging debates on issues that there's no clear-cut answer. There's going to be compromise, and some people are going to be unhappy on this point, and other people are going to have to give a little here. That's the job of Congress, is to be the people's representative. And like I said, I go into this race, I've come into this race, I would go into Congress with that attitude. I mean, it's there has to be this competition between the branches. This is why George Washington warned about partisan politics. He understood that, if it's more about the club that you're in, if it's more about your club loyalty, then you're just going to work within your club to try to control the executive and the legislative and the judicial, and then you can kind of just give all the power to the one person in charge who happens to be the executive. I mean, the Founding Fathers were under the thumb of a monarch. They understood that this is why they designed it this way, and unfortunately, our system has a vulnerability. They couldn't necessarily have predicted it would have played out exactly in this fashion, but I think that the kind of opening up of the floodgates of money into our politics has made it, has aligned the incentives just so much more over the last half century to, in some ways, this is the inevitable outcome. And in some ways, it's as unfortunate as it is to think about it. In some ways, things kind of, things are darkest just before the dawn, right? Things have to get bad enough for us to realize, oh, this is where they've gotten. The system is kind of broken. It's gone beyond the capacity that it was designed for. We need to reach into it and reconfigure some fundamental elements to try to get it back on track. Yes?
Sorry I'm late. I had something else going on, but I did get to hear you in Orville. And I would love to vote for you, but I have one problem that I need to address with you.
Go for it.
We're in my generation, we went through Bush versus Gore and Ralph Nader. And, I just kind of felt like Ralph Nader, we just handed it to Bush. And so I have a big problem with, independent. Because in this state, as in the top two candidates are the people that will be on the ballot.
That's right.
It's not Republican and Democrat, it could be two Republicans. So, I think that's a real problem, and I'd love to vote for you. But could, if you and the Democratic candidate, John, I forget his name, could get together and decide one of us will run. So it doesn't split the vote and give it to Republicans.
I see. Sorry, what was your name?
That was my question.
She was talking to me about that before the event. That very concerned. Here's how I'd respond to that, and a couple of things that I told her as well. We've got, so far there are 5 Republicans declared in the race as well. Really 3 of them I think are more viable or have a chance at pulling a significant percentage of the vote. And then John and myself, I take your concern, I take it seriously. But I think the Republican vote is also going to be spread out amongst a number of candidates. So you don't have I think it'd be one thing if there was only 3 of us, actually we'd be in a good shape there. But you're concerned about 2 Republicans in the general, which is what we saw last time. I guess I would say that it has not taken an independent to be in the race in this district for 2 Republicans to be on the ballot. I mean, Dan Newhouse has run in 6 elections. In 3 of those, he was up against a fellow Republican. Only in 3 did he actually face a Democrat. And I think I've looked at some of those races, and maybe there was an independent in those races. I don't think all of them, but this is a very conservative district. I mean, it's or at least it's a district that's not fond of Democrats. It's certainly the case. The last independent to win a seat to the U.S. House of Representatives, that happened in 1990. The last time a Democrat won in this district was 1992. And that Democrat lasted 1 term, and that independent was Bernie Sanders. So, it's unlikely. I get it. It's a long shot. But I mean, my honest opinion here is it's a long shot for a Democrat in this district too. They may well get through to the general. I fear that once they're in the general, history, the last, the last Democratic victory before that 92 victory was 1978. So, I am not happy that we don't have a competitive district or as competitive district. But I also don't necessarily think I'm acting as the primary spoiler in this case.
I'm not saying that. I just wish that between you and John, you could I don't know, maybe he could resign and you can.
Well, you can tell him that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Following up on that, or maybe it's another way of phrasing it. You say this is a conservative district, of course it is, and you're running as an independent, so I presume that means you think that there are maybe more traditionally conservative voters who might be attracted to your candidacy. So what kind of outreach do you do to more presumptively conservative audiences, and what's your best pitch? Where are the areas where you think you can appeal to that audience?
Yeah, I think a big, again, I'm going to tell an anecdote about my childhood here growing up in Perry County, because there's a way that a kind of animus towards Democrats really seeps in, and liberals, right? And you don't even call them by those terms necessarily. They're the coasties, or whatever, they're the people on Olympia, whatever the disparaging term is. And, look, on some level, I kind of understand that, right? I mean, in our state, especially, do the Democrats really have to come east of the Cascades to win statewide office? Not really. They might do a rally in Spokane, they might do a rally in Yakima or Tri-Cities or something, but for the most part, they're not coming to Tonasket, they're not coming to Oroville. And that has been the case for a long enough time that I can understand where a lot of this kind of bitterness starts to grow, and it hardens hearts, right? People, it's not necessarily, in my view, it's less that we are conservative views, I guess, but I think it's more so they just feel totally forgotten and left out and disparaged and disliked and sneered at and judged. And look, we pick an issue, and maybe that is more justified than not on a given issue to feel some judgment in your heart towards your fellow American. We all have our kind of highest priority issues. But when I was in junior high, Dino Rossi, who was running for governor in 2008, I believe, he came to town to our county fair, and Ferry County's got like 7,000 people totally, right? And most of them are conservative anyway, Republican. They're all going to vote for Dino Rossi. Dino Rossi didn't have to come to town, but he did, and he walked around the fairgrounds. And I remember, as I said at the beginning of my speech, I didn't grow up in a political household, and my mom's a Democrat, but my mom and dad were both like, just because he showed up, shook hands, my mom was like, go Dino, we like followed that election, and we were so mad when he lost, and I'm like sitting in my parents' living room, yeah, Dino, and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm rooting for, I'm rooting for the guy who just came to town, right, and talked to people. And I went up to, just before the forum actually, a couple weeks ago, the night before, Valerie took me on town. She introduced me to some people, and she took me out to a bar. It's a pretty cool bar, and introduced me to some regulars. And I would venture that they're more of a conservative, MAGA, Trumpy crowd. And I ended up having a great conversation with a bunch of these bar patrons, and one of them said to me at the end of the night, he just said, "Thanks so much for coming out and taking the time to talk to us. I mean, who are we? We're just these, nobody's up in a bar in north of Oroville, Washington, and like, does any congressional candidate ever come and speak to us?" So I think half the battle, or even more than half the battle, is just showing up, and we can disagree. People are going to disagree. I don't want to live in a world where I agree 100% of the time with 100% of the people on 100% of the issues. That's a dystopia to me. So we're going to have disagreements, but it's a matter of like, can we stand in the same room and kind of recognize that we can still have conversations. Everyone's going to have their own red lines, but yeah, I remember so strongly that feeling as a kid, like just how much it meant just for someone to show up. I don't think the Democrats really take the time to show up in a lot of communities throughout District 4, east of the mountains in general. Can I go here and then back to you?
Yeah, so I have basically two questions, and I was thinking a little bit about the AI conversation. I think it's Sweden that gave ownership of data to its citizens. And I heard you say at some point we're going to have a conversation, and I actually think that time is now. That we actually have a conversation now about how we manage our rights to privacy surrounding data and surrounding AI, and because we currently live inside of a world that's being drastically radically shaped and changed by it. And if we're get to a point where it's already entrenched and we don't already have a plan for how to deal with that, and there isn't like safeguards or guardrails, and I think that that's too late. And so that's my first question is like, what like practical solutions are you thinking of in terms of that. And then, like, you know, and then my second question is about cost of living and housing and the growing wealth inequality that, like you said, we live in the poorest district in the state. There's so much poverty, and the poverty is just like getting worse. It's growing, and I think we're barreling towards like revolution or civil war. Like that's what I think is happening, because historically, go back in time, wealth inequality is the best predictor of revolution, and we're there. So my question is two questions.
Yeah, okay. I'll start with the data and the AI. That's all well said. So there are some, I think the reason I glossed over this earlier is because I really can get into the technical weeds, and I didn't want to, but you've asked me, so I'll get into the technical weeds a little bit. There are some emerging protocols, technical protocols, that I'm very fond of, that are known broadly as federated protocols. And the idea behind federated protocols is that it creates a universal standard by which anyone who's on like a social platform, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be a social platform, it could be any kind, but that's the easiest kind of touchstone for us in this conversation, is that you would own your data outright, right? It's not living on a server that Facebook owns. It's living on a server that you own. It could be in your home. It could be renting it on the cloud somewhere. But the idea is these protocols are designed to be interoperable with each other. So you could have an account, I could have an account, everyone in the room could have an account. We could all engage with each other, but the actual data is distributed, decentralized, right? It's not all vacuumed up into one big database. And there are cool implications that can flow from that, and I think we can. You ask practical solutions. Here's the practical solution.
Sell your data.
What's it?
I mean,
You can sell if you wanted to, but you don't have to. You could also say there could be a mandate to AI companies. Hey, listen, we basically allowed you to perfect the method of how you train these LLMs and how you vacuum up all this data. But we're going to kind of nullify all these models that were based on stolen data, and we're going to go into this new world now where people are going to have that explicit choice. More people own their data outright, and you're not allowed to take it unless you have explicit consent. And then at least there's something of a voluntary transaction, and you know that your data is only being handed over because you made a decision to hand it over. So those are some practical steps. Again, we can talk more after I can get in the weeds about some of this stuff. Your second question, though, I want to get to as well. Wealth inequality, yes, it's a huge problem. Some things, obviously, this is maybe at the heart or underlies the concern about getting money out of politics too, right? Because if we have a system where one group of people has claimed almost all of the material kind of wealth in the nation, and then by virtue of having that wealth, they can turn around and also just basically own, which they're going to inevitably, what are they going to do? They're going to pass policies that make them able to consolidate even more wealth. And then with more wealth, they have even more control. And it's this, positive feedback loop that gets us into, bad territory. So at the heart of my concern about money in politics is also wealth inequality and recognition that the people who have so much right now also effectively have our government. And so we're not going to be able to really solve it until we solve that fundamental issue. But there are specific things we should be focused on doing. It doesn't make any sense to me that the capital gains tax rate, which is how most of these incredibly wealthy people make their money, nominally at least, is lower than the tax rate for labor, right? There's this expression that I've heard that we need to tax wealth and not labor. The idea being people who go out and actually work and sweat and bleed and hurt their backs, and they get taxed. More of their money is taken away than people who just happen to be very wealthy or just have a lot of money and they put it in. They're not doing any work necessarily to get that return. They're getting that return by virtue of having had the money in the first place. So it doesn't make any sense to me why there's a discount for them. But I think the bigger problem, even bigger than that, is that the way that a lot of people who have an extreme amount of wealth operate is they never actually realize their gains. A lot of this is stock market manipulation and just holdings, and then they'll go out and they'll borrow against, they'll leverage what they own in the stock market or their real estate holdings, whatever it is, and they'll get a $100 million line of credit from a bank, backstopped by their stock ownership, and then they can use that $100 million line of credit to buy real things in the real world, and all they have to do is service the interest on that loan. Effectively, what it allows them to do is completely sidestep any taxes and continue to just hoard more and more and more of that wealth. There's also there's this thing called the carried interest loophole, which allows hedge funds to keep a lot more money and shelter from taxes. There are a lot of dirty tricks right now in the books that allow people who have massive amounts of wealth to keep accruing that wealth without actually redistributing it, any of it, into our system.
How do you address the basic needs of a working class, though?
Universal healthcare. I think that I'm also a fan of, and this is another part of my platform, but it also gets a little bit politically wonky, but there was this progressive politician, American progressive politician named Henry George in the 19th century, and his idea, he was really focused on land. At the time, the West was being settled primarily, right? So the government was giving out lots of land, and his concern fundamentally was around land barons, people who would come and vacuum up a bunch of land, and then they, by virtue of having that land, they could kind of manipulate land values. They could, let's say they want to be a landlord. Well, they could build some apartments on some of their land and intentionally keep the rest of their land undeveloped so that they can inflate the price of their, what they have to charge their tenants. So anyway, all that to say that he advocated for what's called a land value tax rather than a property tax, which is the primary method by which we, Philip seems to think I'm parched. Thank you, Philip. Yep. Anyway, this. Sorry, folks. Your troubles. I'm getting into the weeds here. I get that, but the principal kind of value add of a land value tax is, the idea is it forces more rapid redistribution of wealth, and it brings things like housing costs down because there's more competitive pressure to build more inexpensive housing. Anyway, that's, right now we've got, what are the biggest costs in this country? Healthcare, housing, education, higher education, and increasingly, frankly, consumer goods and even food. So yeah, I think the universal healthcare system, I spoke about this at the forum in Orville. I think we need meaningful reforms to get housing built faster. This is another area where people who have a lot of money work, or homeowners typically, right, have worked to prevent more homes from being developed or apartments from being developed because they want to protect their home ownership valuation. So that's a big reason why we have housing shortages and housing prices are so high. We've allowed that to happen for a long time. And yeah, it's an all of the above approach. I'm sorry if I'm not like getting to the heart of your question, but what's that?
I said I understand.
Okay.
I would just like to say that this isn't the first time we've been in this position. After World War II, the whole world recreated a healthy banking economy. We know how to do this. It's just having the political will to do it.
Yeah, we have to make investments into American communities instead of into bombing Iranians.
They built housing for the soldiers after World War II. I mean, there was huge, family housing that got built
We do. Yes.
The trend I've seen in the federal government is as newer congressmen and women spend time in Washington, they start to drift from the will of their constituents. What would you do to prevent that and stay in touch with the vibe and the beat of the people that voted you in?
Yeah, I think the number one thing, the easiest thing you can do is just refuse any kind of super PAC money, corporate money. Don't take a meeting with a lobbyist ever. I mean, that's it, right? It's like if you have to continue earning your vote every cycle by coming back to your district and saying, here are the things I've done, here's the things I said I would do, here's the things I worked to get done. You know, maybe I didn't succeed on every one of them because you're never going to bat 100 when you're in Congress. Certain things are going to, you know, bills are going to fail, etc. But yeah, and it's just the people will judge you at that point. You know, do we think you made an earnest effort? Okay, you delivered these things. We see that you've taken no money from special interests. Who else are you answering to?
Because I've never seen a congressman that made promises we voted in, and then those promises weren't necessarily fulfilled, which is fine. But they never come back to us, and there's no accountability. There's no, hey, this is what happened, let's talk about it. Because you guys are responsible for me being here, making this money.
Right.
And that's important, I feel.
Yeah, I definitely view part of the role of being a congressman as, you know, you go to DC and you work on legislation and you negotiate stuff, and if you're lucky, you get something passed, right? You made a campaign promise to your district, to your constituents, you get it passed, success. And they celebrate, but oftentimes the problem there is that, you know, words on paper when a bill gets signed, that doesn't translate into the real world, right? I think there's still work to be done to make sure that, okay, yeah, we scored funding to help farmers install solar panels on their farms to get them some additional revenue, right? I want to be here in the district on the ground, like working with anyone who's eligible for that program, and it could be other programs, right? Not just that one, but if I'm in Congress and I'm saying, here's the things I think my district needs, I managed to get some of those resources appropriated. Like, my goal is to come back and find as many people who, it's like, you're eligible for this. Like, let's get you in the pipeline. Here's what you got to do. Here's the steps. Here's the applications. My office is going to work to help, like, any constituent that, you know, is eligible for those things. Let's get it expedited and let's get it actually built, because you know, I'm a Washingtonian. I love this state. I love Central and Eastern Washington. I mean, I want to see it do well. I want to see it prosper, right? And a bill passing doesn't automatically equal that prosperity. It doesn't automatically equal results. So there's still that follow-up. I mean, typically, we talked earlier about the separation between congressional, you know, the legislative branch and the executive. Part of the reason that happens a lot of times is because Congress does view it as their job to pass the bill, and now the funds are appropriated. Now it's in the hands of the executive and executive agencies, and now it's on them to actually implement the program or whatever, or distribute the resources. And I guess getting back also to your concern is that I would work very hard to, in any situation where it's applicable, where I can go harass someone in a federal agency, hey, you know, I was a sponsor on this bill, it got passed, it appropriated these funds. I know exactly what you're on the hook for doing. Like, within 6 months, you have to have an application form that's ready and available to the public. I want to know exactly what format and how you're adjusting it. I think there's got to be a little bit of guerrilla, you know, legislative warfare here, where we're taking a little power back and keeping the executive honest to make sure, again, like, there's a lot that has to happen, but if we're successful and we made a promise and we're working to get this thing done and we get it done, okay, the job is not done yet. We've still got to make sure there's the follow-up to see it implemented in people's lives on the ground.
Drink water.
Okay, I got a couple questions. One someone in the crowd wrote down. Another was on Facebook, so I'm going to try tying the two together. Basically, the gist is, what are your thoughts on federal public lands? Like, we got a lot of Forest Service land around here, and what are your thoughts on, you know, how private interact with these lands, how corporations interact with these lands, and how the government does? Like, what would you propose
for responsibly managing federal lands?
7 generations.
Yeah.
There was a question, or no, it wasn't a question. There was a candidate at the Oroville Forum who suggested selling off public lands, privatizing them as a solution to whatever question it was we were asking. The room was not on that suggestion, and I zipped up to the podium to let everyone know that I will unequivocally oppose any effort to privatize public lands. Then there's the matter of, using resources, utilizing resources on those public lands. Yes, there are resources on public lands. I think it's possible for us to use them without destroying our environments and our habitats. I think that I could be wrong, and I may need to just look into this and see exactly what the state of the current policies and regulations are. But I'm sure there are good ones, bad ones. I'm sure there are ones that have been loosened in the interest of, a logging company or a mining company managed to, get their congressman to do them a favor, and now we're seeing clear cutting in the Colville National Forest or something. So, in general, the North Star is if resource extraction of some kind is to happen on public lands, which we all share ownership of, then that resource extraction has to happen in a sustainable fashion. That's it. It's pretty simple to me.
I have another question that you're probably not gonna like. So,
sabotaging me.
Yeah, I'm sabotaging you. I think you have a very good understanding of the issues, but as you alluded to earlier, I'm worried because a lot of this district is conservative, and so when you decided to run, what were some of the things you identified with as, being more conservative? Like, why didn't you just run as a Democrat, and why did you decide to run as an independent?
Why did I decide to run as an independent rather than a Democrat or a Republican? I just think both those parties are corrupt. I think they're rotten to the core. That's the shortest answer possible. You can pick certain issues and say, well, I like what the Democrats say more here, but talk is cheap. I think we've seen a lot of talk from politicians on all sides, and then fundamentally when the rubber meets the road, it's like actions get passed, policy gets passed that serves the most well-connected, the wealthiest, special interests in DC. That's it. So I could approach this from the point of view of I want to be a reform Democrat or I want to be a reform Republican. I want to try to reform these entities, but I'm an American first. I don't feel like I owe anything to these. These are little clubs, right? These are like elite clubs in Washington, D.C. They're not in the Constitution. They're just, it's a good old boys club in both cases, and I don't feel that I have any particular responsibility to try and clean up their mess. I'd rather just go to Congress and speak honestly about, is this good policy? Is this bad policy? Should we do this? Is this going to work? Is this going to benefit people in my district? Yes or no, or let's have a negotiation. I don't want to be bound by partisan considerations. I don't think that gets us into productive territory.
You mentioned the good old boys club. I have a real problem with the good old boys club. It seems like the good old boys club doesn't care about many of us women. And seems like, especially, well, at least with all my friends and stuff that I know, it seems like we women we do all the work. And I know that's not true. It's a blanket statement. It's not correct.
You do a lot of work.
But it's just, it really, really, especially particularly now, it's really annoying to me to see how we've gone from a second-class citizen to what seems like a sixth. And that pisses me off.
I agree.
But how does one person, an independent person that has a brain, how do you address, I mean, how?
Yeah, that's lead by example, I suppose. I mean, I think that obviously with the repeal of Roe v. Wade, right? That's a huge legislative, or it was judicial in that case, but it's a matter of law, right? And so that can be negotiated, that can be debated. There could be a fight had on that. I obviously disagree with the repeal of Roe v. Wade. It's been horrible for a lot of women in a lot of states, thankfully not ours. But I think that beyond that, just the rising tide, I think, of misogyny and ugliness towards women. I think it starts at the top, right? These days, it is. We do not have the best role models who take up a lot of the airwaves on this issue, I would say. So I like to think my mom raised me right and taught me to treat everyone with respect, including the women in my life, and I have a lot of women in my life who I love and care about deeply. I don't know if that is adequate, but standing up when people say terrible things, being willing to put your neck on, stick your neck out when it's not the most popular thing. I think like a lot of things, a lot of that angst and that anger and that venom that is being hurled increasingly at women, and unfortunately by a lot of young men too, towards younger women. I think it does stem from, it's not to excuse it, but it's to try to understand what motivates some of that deeper dissatisfaction and disillusionment with this moment in history. And again, I think to live in an era of have and have-nots, to live in an era of extreme inequality, inevitably is going to lead to a lot of anger and resentment. And then there are always going to be people who swoop in, get you to take advantage of that general malaise and anger and say, hey, it's really, it's that immigrant over there, it's these women in real life, they're not, giving you what you really deserve. It's no, these are not the root causes of the problems in our society, but we are unfortunately susceptible to that kind of, persuasion. So.
I know it's, of course, Roe versus Wade and the abortion issue is a huge thing to jump to. Also, I mean, it's of course. But the thing is okay, I never had children. I've never had an abortion. I took birth control to the nth degree. Okay, I took it really serious. But back in the 80s and 90s, probably 90s to change. I mean, I had to, your insurance didn't cover your birth control bills. You had to pay for them. Unless you could go to Planned Parenthood, which you can't here because they took it away. And if I remember right, my birth control pills were $30 a month. I could be wrong. That's a long time ago, and I got to do that money. But it cost me money, is what I'm saying. It costs mothers with children money to get their children taken care of while they go out and work. And it seems just recently, so I got a job, and I was in the training phase, and so I got paid, pretty good amount of money because I had a lot of hours, not a whole lot of money, but it was good to me. Anyways, it knocked me off my Medicaid. And part of the problem I was having at my job, which I need my eyes, I work for the library, I was having trouble with looking at the book and then putting it in the shelf and doing that. And I wanted to go see an eye doctor, and I made an appointment. I had to wait 3 months for the appointment. Well, in that 3-month period was that month of training, knocked me off my insurance. So then I had to cancel, because I called the eye doctor to find out how much would it cost me to get just pay for the exam. It was $400 to $500 just to go get your eyes looked at. Forget glasses or anything else. And I couldn't afford $400 to $500, so I had to cancel the appointment. But because I wasn't working anymore those many hours, I went back on Medicaid as of February 1st.
But see, I missed my eye appointment. So now my eye appointment's in July.
Yeah.
And I need the eye appointment to do my damn job. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
And mothers, who, like I said, I am not, but mothers have even more things come up that are kind of that, oh, okay, well, you got that, well, here you go. They push you back, you know, and I know one person can't change all of them, but it's just, it's where my head is. I think that so many women have it a lot harder than I did when I was in.
Yeah, I think we need a universal healthcare system in this country. That's a big,
Yeah.
It doesn't,
But it's not the solution to the whole issue. I mean, like, my mother was born and raised in England. I was in England as a child when I came down with moms, and I got to enjoy the universal healthcare.
Yes.
Because I was considered a good subject because I was a kid. So, but in England, if you have nothing life-threatening, say you blew out your hip, you're gonna have to wait, because there's a whole bunch of other people who blew out their hips, and you have to get in line. And if you have a lot of money, then you're gonna go to Germany or Switzerland and get surgery, and you're not even gonna get in line, because you are a have. But the have-nots have to get in line. And again, that's in healthcare, but then there's the have-nots, the mothers, that have 2 or 3 or 5 or however many kids because they didn't get the birth control. Do you see where I'm going with that? It's kind of like dominoes.
yeah. Oh, sorry. I don't know if I have a specific response to you. I empathize with the struggle that you're describing.
Me too. I mean, yeah, I was pretty rough.
Sorry. I saw your hand up. Can I go?
No, that's fine.
Do you guys want to rock, paper, scissors to see?
Gavin, how will you get elected?
By you voting for me.
Well, right.
It's
I
that
mean,
easy.
When it comes to little Tonasket, I mean, it's really like, all right, this is great. I really appreciate your using your precious time. I mean, have you got this scoped out so that, you can get exposure as much as you can in the 4th District?
Yeah. Philip, my illustrious campaign manager over there, and I have been working to get more events on the books. Tomorrow I'll be in Winthrop meeting with it's kind of an informal meet and greet, but I'm hoping to use that to, leverage that into a bigger, establish some connections in the community, and then we'll do an official event like this and get more people in. Then I'm heading up to Chesaw actually on Monday.
You drove all the way down here. Twice. Yeah.
I can't get rid of you, Bobby. And then we've got, I think I'm going to be down in Othello later next week. We've got stuff all out. We'd have to look at the calendar, but we're going all over, and we've got a decent network of support that's formed in the Yakima area too. So yeah, it's a big district, a lot of driving, just trying to, it's just hard to get people in the room, to be honest. So thank you all for coming out today. This is amazing. This is good turnout, and I'm happy that I had an opportunity to talk to everyone. But yeah, 4 months of being very busy. That is the answer until the primary in early August, and then the chips fall away in May.
Where are you going to be in Chesapeake?
I was gonna be just kind of walking around town. It's a pretty small town, right?
I just say hang out down.
Go to the tavern.
The tavern. I was gonna go to the Merc and then the
Tavern's
tavern.
the best place to go, man.
Yeah, I'll go everywhere. I like it.
That
There's not that many options.
Might be Chesaw?
What's that?
Chesaw.
Monday, yeah.
Okay.
What is the percentage of the vote that you need to go on to the next step?
15 to 20, Philip? Yeah, 15 to 20.
And what is your realistic expectations of hitting that? Just in all honesty.
It's slim. It's an uphill battle. I mean, I'm.
20%.
It's probably fair.
Fair.
Yeah.
I appreciate an honest candidate, man. That's what I'm at. I'm probably the only staunch conservative in the room. I have an open mind, so
Cool.
I'm open to listening to everybody.
I appreciate you coming out. Thanks for coming, guys.
And I say conservative because I am absolutely not part of the MAGA party.
So it sounds like the issue of women, and I think this goes back to like I think a lot about what we leave behind for the next generation and our children, and how, I mean, in my opinion, the most oppressed class of people on earth are children, and people don't really think about it or talk about it, and we don't have sufficient supports in our communities for children and their caregivers. And so I heard you talk about universal health care, but I'm curious about universal child care and the things that would actually support mothers and children and the people who have and raise children to actually give them a stable foundation. And even like our educational system is it's so, because I worked in education for a long time, and it is so developmentally inappropriate that it actually makes me want to scream. And it harms children, and then therefore the next generation. It's honest, like the bell system in schools is based on factory workers in the early 20th century. Like that's what we're dealing with in terms of, and like we don't give them the time and space to play. We don't support mothers and fathers and grandparents and whoever is raising children. I raised my two teenage brothers, and I had no one and nothing as a buffer. And I looked everywhere for buffers, and there was no buffer. And that is like, and anyone who raises children knows that, but that primarily affects women. And I just want to know what kind of solutions you have for families and education and children.
I don't know if I have any, obvious solutions that I have been thinking about, deeply or like that are on my campaign platform, right? Part of the challenge of running for office is there are many, but one is you have to try to think about all sorts of things and where do I stand on all sorts of issues, and there are all sorts of problems in society, challenges, and how might we best address those things. So I will say that my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She raised me and my three brothers. We didn't have a lot of money. She relied heavily on, I think it was I don't know if it's a broader organization. I think it is. It was called MOPS, I think. Yeah, Mothers of Preschoolers. And I remember the tiny little house in Curlew that she used to go to with my younger brother, because I was actually in school at that point, but my youngest brother was not. And so, she would bring my brother there, but she would also volunteer there. Anyway, I'm skirting the question. I totally agree with you that this is a challenge that needs to be resolved, and we don't adequately put resources towards this problem. I mean, we just sent a crew of people around the moon. I think that we can get our heads together and make sure we allocate resources in a way that effectively,
Children can be healthy.
Yes.
Mothers can be healthy.
And their caregivers, their
Yeah.
caregivers need to be healthy, so children need to be healthy. I mean, what about universal child care? I know that our country is far from probably able to pass something like that.
we would need I support the idea, like, conceptually, obviously, there's just many hurdles to jump through. Like, we need a lot of caregivers to be trained in a way that people feel obviously comfortable leaving their children. But I think it's doable. I don't think any of those things are unachievable or can't.
What about subsidies for childcare? Because we have some, but it's very limited in terms of people who need subsidies for childcare.
Yeah, I will look more into it. But I broadly support this notion. What you're describing, yeah.
My oldest daughter, 40 years ago, was an exchange student from Wenatchee High School to Norway, and she has came home for a year and has lived there ever since. She would never come back because of child care, health care. Their system is so superior to ours.
Yeah, yes, the Scandinavian countries often get a lot of credit. There are other European countries that do this better. And the kind of retort that is often thrown back at Americans is like, well, but we're the ones paying for defense of Europe, basically. We have to pay this big military budget and they don't have to invest as much, and that's why they get to have all these gifts. Well, maybe we don't have to be spending nearly $1 trillion every year on our military either.
One of the things, the way that we have our economic system set up, where every member of the family has to be involved in business instead of taking care of home life, we can
And it's a
change our
cultural
values on our economic system.
too. Sorry. But it's possible.
What's the
The idea that because we are paying for this,
No, I'm just speaking more broadly that we're a very wealthy country. We have a lot of resources. We choose to allocate them in a particular way, and it leaves issues like this, less prioritized compared to others. And I think it's valid to challenge that status quo.
So I just wanted to kind of go off of what Ellie was saying because maybe you don't know already. So just another thing to put on your plate. So one of the big things that supports families that has continually been in the chopping block is part of USDA, the WIC program.
Yeah.
I work for them, so I'm biased, but it's an amazing, I'm here totally independently. Every time something comes up, so part of the WIC program is giving certain foods to families who have children under 5 or are pregnant. And there's fruits and vegetables benefits, which in turn benefit all of our local farmers because they can spend them at the farmers market. And when my youngest kids are almost 9, and when they graduated that program at 5 years old, it was like in the midst of COVID, so we're getting $30 a piece because we had these huge subsidies. Before that, it was $8 a month. And right now, every time a budget gets put out there, they want to go back to that pre-COVID $8 per person a month. I mean, what is that by? To buy
loaf of bread.
This
Maybe
just
2.
for fruits and vegetables. There's other things too, but so that's part of USDA. So just another thing to keep in mind. That's such an important program, and these USDA funds all sorts of other important programs as well. But that SNAP and WIC is super important.
Yeah, my mother relied on WIC when especially when we lived in Louisiana. My dad, the reason we moved up here was because my dad got a job at the Job Corps in Curlew, and that was a big pay bump. It was by no means not wealthy or anything, but it was compared to what my parents were making in Louisiana. They were well under the poverty line, and so my parents are some of the hardest working people I've ever met, and my mom, I think unfortunately programs like this too often carry a stigma of well, you're just getting a handout. It's my mother will swear up and down on this saved our life in the moment. We didn't need it any longer. But when we did, it was a lifesaver, and we couldn't have got through without it. So these things are near and dear to me, and I understand the impact they had on my own family growing up. So thank you for speaking up about it. I agree with $8 a month. It's preposterous. Lawrence.
So this is related, but there was the No Child Left Behind Act, which I'm not familiar with all aspects of the bill. There was a lot to it and a lot wrong with it, but a lot of it had to do with the way that schools and districts get their funding. And I think that there's extra barriers and stuff. But one of the things that is part of the funding that they get is that it creates an unequal amount of funding between rural and urban schools, and even within urban areas, areas get less money typically because it's based, a lot of the funding, not all of it, is based on property tax revenue, and we see that around here, maybe not as much Tonasket, but schools around here, a lot of the schools, the facilities and all these different things and like the level of education, it's like lacking in so many aspects. But then, I go to a place, even like Wenatchee, even though it's not like great, or like a bigger city, and their schools are like, their facilities are like so much newer, so much nicer. They have a school pool, and like all these different things, and that they get, but like rural schools don't get, because it is an unequal playing field. And I mean, generally the rural and like urban things, that by being in a rural area, you can be more prone to poverty by the different access. But I guess my question is like, how would you deal with that side of things and different things? Like Finland is like, their schools are funded at like a equal level, and would you support the revenue, the funding indifferently?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I went to Curlew High School, and we were fortunate that the community pretty consistently passed levies that made sure we had additional funding in our school district. So things were never dire up at Curlew. But when I moved to Seattle, and I eventually met my now wife, she went to Redmond High School, which was one of the wealthiest, zip codes in the state. And she tells me about some of the amenities they had at her high school. And by no means, I don't think my high school experience was terrible. We were very fortunate. We had good teachers, and we had some good programs. But it consistently blows my mind to hear some of the things that she had access to as a high schooler. Yeah, again, I don't know if that's best solved at the federal or state level. Most of the money, I think, I could be wrong, most of the money that funds schools, I think, comes through state level taxes, and obviously property taxes and county taxes. And it's a smaller portion than a lot of people assume that comes from the Department of Education, but it doesn't mean they can't be addressed, or there can't be a more equal distribution of those funds. I just don't know the exact mechanism that needs to be, which dial needs to be adjusted.
I know we need to fund our schools. I'm not saying no on that. What I'm saying is, I'm speaking for senior citizens, myself included. I lived in my old house for 30 years, kind of up. And I lived in North Bend, not far from Redmond. When I bought the house, the property taxes were at $760 in '88. I left in 2018 when they were $7,600. They taxed me on my house. I lost. I didn't lose it. I sold it, thank God. But that's why I'm here. I had to move out of my house, whether I wanted to or not. It had nothing to do with it, and I did not. And that was right at the side. I went to sleep. I had 3 acres. It was lovely. And there's plenty of people around here that have lived in their houses for 30 years, and now they're aging like I am. Of course, the property taxes are a piece of cake compared to what I'm used to. But you see what I'm saying? Where we need to fund our children, but at the same time, we can't kick our senior citizens out of their homes, and that's what's happening. Somewhere, the taxes, it shouldn't be so driven in one particular space, the property taxes. Or even if you don't own property, if you rent, you're still going to pay for that property tax increase.
Rich people gotta start paying taxes, that's all there is to it.
Well, one comment I will say, I mentioned land value taxes earlier. We don't have to get in the weeds, but I think the land value taxes ultimately would work better than property taxes and would prevent the exact situation you described, which land value tax system means that you don't see these massive increases in property tax unless the entire region basically that you're living in becomes massively more productive, or it's a kind of regional lift in land taxes rather than individual parcels that are going up because your neighbor sold their house for more, the county assessed your house for more. It's not a super, Pennsylvania does this a little bit, Texas does this a little bit. It's not super common in the states, but it would prevent some of that, those more egregious situations.
Well, and I think there needs to be tax reform that doesn't grant the greatest amount of funding to schools in wealthy districts, because then it continue to concentrate the wealth and prevents impoverished communities like ours from receiving the kind of funding that would actually, for education, that would actually give our children more access, because the way that the tax structure is currently set up, like Lauren said, it's based on, property taxes, and the same would be true if it were, I think.
Land value tax. It would be similar, yeah, you're right.
It would be similar in that sense. There still needs to be reform. You shouldn't be receiving more funding for their children than impoverished communities.
Yeah, well, I could guess clarification. I was saying that the way that it's redistributed, part of that is based on the amount of property tax revenue that there is in an area. So if you have more property taxes in one area, your schools are going to be nicer. I think whichever way that you are getting that the taxes are coming to fund education, that it should be funded on an equal playing field for all the schools. And that wouldn't mean the same amount of money for schools, I imagine, because schools are different sizes, but more the amount of money per student in each district. I think that, it should be I think you almost have to, I don't know, flatten the playing field, and yeah.
Redmond
but also,
High School can afford to be a little less luxurious.
Yeah.
Sure.
Also, property taxes. If you only have for your only the house that you live in, or only one property that you own, seems difficult for people to keep up with. Property taxes make sense if you are for people that own a bunch of properties. But if most people either don't own any property or they just own their house, and it's people should not have to give up home ownership because of property taxes like she did.
Okay, so here is the big elephant in the room that I think politicians don't like talking about. I'm happy that you're an independent, because I would say loudly that the progressive and Democrat solution is to spend on programs. And I agree, most of those programs are pretty valuable. And the Republican or conservative is cut. Well, talking about 7 generations, we are going to be so inflated and broke as a country in 7 generations that none of this is worth talking about unless we get our national budget under control. Yes. And it's going to take a lot of hard cuts, and it's going to take some tax increases. How would you go about even formulating a plan and getting your fellow congressmen on board with stabilizing our budget before it's too late, if it's not too late already?
Yeah, I mentioned some of the specific tax mechanisms earlier. Most of them are, billionaire and giant corporate loopholes. I won't restate all of them, and I'm sure there's more that I am not, either aware of or I'm just forgetting off the top of my head here. There's additional revenue that can be raised there. I do think our military budget is hyperinflated. I don't think we need to be spending more than the next, 13 countries combined on their militaries. We have a formidable military. Okay, we don't need to spend as much as we do on it, in my view. We also, the biggest line item in the federal budget right now is Social Security. And the problem is that there's a cap on the Social Security payroll tax. So I think right now Social Security payments are estimated to be cut down to 75 or 80% of the current payout by early 2030s. and politicians in DC don't seem too motivated to resolve that. But one of the reasons that that became a problem in the first place was that we were running surpluses in Social Security for a lot of years, for like 4 decades almost, from 1983 to 2021, we were running surpluses. The problem is, whenever we run a surplus with the Social Security payroll tax, the Treasury would buy that surplus and write an IOU basically to the Social Security Trust. But the excess money would go effectively into the general fund, and then politicians would do this kind of DC accounting where it's like, oh, like we did have that cash. They double dipped that money, and often they used it to justify tax cuts when we didn't really have the money to be able to afford a tax cut. Or they're increasing spending in programs, assuming, hey, we have this money that's available to us. So, I mean, Social Security, I believe, is nearly $3 trillion of the entire federal budget in a given year, 2.5, 2.6. We've got to lift the cap on the payroll. If we run future surpluses, we've got to make sure that the only thing that surplus money can be used for is to pay down the national debt. Nothing else. Not to justify tax breaks, not to justify spending increases elsewhere. It pays down the national debt. That's the only good purpose you can use that money for. And then there's a couple other things you can do about, how to kind of manage the surplus that I would be open to. One of them is you buy yourself even more buffer on this by allowing some amount of that surplus to be invested in equities. We do that here in Washington State with some of our long-term care plans. A place like Norway, which has come up a few times here tonight, does that with their sovereign wealth fund. Have to be very, very, very careful that I've talked a lot about corruption tonight, so I'm well aware that like the idea of even a small portion of a surplus being like carefully invested into index funds or something. But the reason why you do that is you get a better return than Treasury bills. Anyway, this gets really dry and boring very quickly. The point is, like, there's got to be some serious, quick reforms to Social Security to make sure that the payout remains 100, but that future cuts can't be justified by fudging the Social Security revenue numbers, and that spending increases aren't justified by fudging those numbers either. We've been doing this for like 30 or 40 years. It's been a big deal. Once again, the kind of state we're in now with a budget where we keep having to borrow to kind of meet our obligations every year has been a result of decades of pretending like we have money we don't have. A lot of it has been down to Social Security. So I think resolving that, reforming that, and many of these tax loopholes have to be closed. And I mean, I think that raising top marginal tax rates on some of the wealthiest people in the country, this is what we did post-World War II and throughout the New Deal era, and we used that money to make durable investments across the country. And I mean, we unfortunately, 40 years or so of really bad, irresponsible spending has put us in a situation where we're spending $1 trillion on interest every year, just on interest. So, yeah.
I think the Senate just passed a bill raising the baseline payout to seniors and lifting that cap.
The payroll? Oh, I should look into
I think
that.
the Senate, Bernie Sanders.
We'll see if the House passes it. It might go die in the
But
House.
that's a start.
Yeah.
The Senate passed it.
Are voting for you?
I can't say I've had a lot of them openly, admitting as much. I have a feeling that there are, actually even in the last election in 2024, there were, we talked a bit about our options for the ballots and concerns about an independent candidate running. Donald Trump ran 13 points ahead of Jared Sessler, who was the Trump-aligned guy, against another Republican who had voted to impeach Trump. So I think there is still a lot of Republican support that, unfortunately, if their choice for president is a Republican versus a Democrat, they're still going to vote Republican, even if that Republican is Donald Trump. But if they have a choice between a Republican and a Republican who they perceive to be, an anti-Trump Republican or even a moderate Republican versus the Trump-endorsed Republican, they choose. There's a big chunk that have chosen the moderate Republican. So Anyway, all that to say that I think there's a, I think it indicates there's a sizable Republican or voter who tends to vote Republican chunk of the electorate in this district who are at least going to be open to other options, but I don't think they even are going to want to bring themselves to vote for a Democrat. I think it's deeply in their bones, like they're just not going to be able to bring themselves.
About and then you were talking about balancing the budget and taxes. What about, what would you think about this kind of an idea about taxing monopolies, or rather companies that have more monopolies, the more monopolization that a company has, the more taxes that they get, especially because I think banning that outright might be difficult, but if you had
the better solution is just break those companies up.
Yeah.
There's antitrust laws on the books, they just don't get enforced, and they have to get enforced. So I'm gonna wrap it up now. I'll come talk to you after, unless you really want to get it in another one. Okay. Our numbers have dwindled a little even throughout, but thank you everyone for listening to me yammer on for 2 hours. Thanks for your questions. They were good questions, good discussion, and I have to say that if anything I said here tonight sparks joy, consider donating a little bit of money to the campaign. It helps us buy another gallon of gas, and we certainly need help with our gas bill at the moment.
How
Thank
can
you.
we get involved if we like what you're saying?
Oh, you can get involved if you like what I'm saying by leaving your name and email address, and my lovely assistants over here will take that information. And then if you're interested in helping to volunteer in any way, or just help to spread the word, another phone call. Is it spam risk? We'll see. We'll soon find out. Yes, please leave your contact info and we'll get you in the pipeline if you're interested. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. You can talk about me on social media too, please do. Well, you can be critical, if I...
Oh yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's,
Don't you feel like it's changed a lot since when you grew up?